Hello, my name is Kirsten Phoenix, and the story that I want to tell you today is about the Alaska Sami and their reindeer, who journeyed to Alaska from Norway in 1898. The Sami were hired by Sheldon Jackson to help haul relief supplies to the starving miners in the upper Yukon Valley. The first time Jackson hired Sami, or Laplanders as they were called then, was in 1884. Jackson hired William Shellman, who had grown up in Finnmark, worked as a reindeer herder, and spoke the Sami language. Shellman was charged with recruiting Sami herding families. 5 families and a 17-year-old boy traveling by himself signed 3-year contracts. The group was called the Shellman Expedition. They sailed from Norway on April 10, 1894, bringing along their herd dogs and pulkas, or their sleds. The Shellman expedition arrived in New York Harbor on May 12th. The herders crossed the United States by train to Seattle, and from there the group of herders proceeded to San Francisco and then sailed north to Alaska. They arrived at Teller Station on July 29th, 1894. This expedition is indicated on the map as a red line. The success of the Shellman expedition made it possible for Jackson to raise funds to bring a larger group of herders from Sapmi. The Yukon relief expedition started in Norway just like the first, but this time the Sami brought reindeer too. On February 4th, 1898, at Bosekop, a seaport on the north coast of Norway, an aging vessel called the Manitoban hoisted anchor bound for New York. The 539 reindeer that were on board were geldings purchased by the United States Army to serve as draft animals and a source of food for the gold miners who were starving in the Yukon. The antlers of the reindeers had been sawed off to make room for them on the ship and to prevent them from injuring each other. The ship also carried 418 pulkas, 511 reindeer harnesses, and a large quantity of moss to feed the reindeer during the trip. Besides the reindeer and the equipment, there were 113 passengers on board. These included Sami herding families with their children, adventurous bachelors, 6 young couples on their honeymoons, and a small number of Norwegians and Finns who were also herders or else they served as cooks. Before embarking at Bosekop, the reindeer and their herders had struggled through a raging blizzard that escalated as the Manitoban set sail, with temperatures well below zero. That the Yukon relief expedition began in such foul weather did not bode well. There is a Sami proverb that states, "How it goes with the first day's traveling, so it will be with the rest of the journey." It was a frightening voyage. Bertina, or Bernie, Veens of Bethel, Alaska, a first-generation descendant of the Alaska Sami, has written down the stories she heard from her mother, Ellen Sarah. Ellen was 15 when she crossed the Atlantic with her father and mother and her 4 brothers, aged 2 to 12. They got under way, breaking all ties to their homeland. These hardy landlubbers then experienced an ocean storm for 9 days, with the storm increasing in violence every day. Captain Braze, with 42 years of experience at sea, said he had never encountered worse than that storm. The reindeer proved to be good travelers during the voyage, but the Laplanders were both homesick and seasick, and having second thoughts about their venture into the unknown. The New York Times reported that the Manitoban reached New York on February 28, 1898. Only 1 reindeer was lost, and all the passengers were safe and sound. The article also reported that among the passengers there were celebrities. There was a Samuel Johansen Balto who crossed Greenland with Fridtjof Nansen and had received a silver medal from Oscar II, King of Sweden and Norway. Ole Paulsen was given 2 medals and a silver pitcher from King Oscar for his skill in rifle shooting, and Johan Peter Stilgaro, had the distinction of being the northernmost mail carrier in the world. The group traveled west by train, the reindeer in cattle cars and the herders in Pullmans. According to Bernie's mother, Ellen Sarah, people crowded around the train to catch a glimpse of them. The reindeer and the herders were a sensation wherever they were seen by the public. As they started their journey west, the Secretary of War had canceled the relief mission. Since the crisis at Dawson City had evaporated, the distressed miners had simply dispersed up or down the Yukon by their own efforts. Nonetheless, the Yukon Relief Expedition still headed north. They reached Seattle on March 7, 1898. The delay in Seattle proved catastrophic for the reindeer. Their supply of moss dwindled rapidly, and they could not digest the grass where they were taken to graze. The reindeer began to starve, and 12 died in Woodland Park. Leaving the women and children at Port Townsend, Washington, 57 of the men and the starving reindeer continued on by ship to Haines Mission, which is now Haines, Alaska. On March 17th, the reindeer and drivers were loaded aboard the sailing vessel the Seminole. The plan was to drive the reindeer overland from Haines Mission um, over the Dalton Trail via the Chilkat Pass to Circle City, where the reindeer could be used by various U.S. Army exploring expeditions. In this picture of the bear family, the man in the middle is Anders Bear. He is the Laplander Andrew Bear in Arctic Exodus by Dick North. Julia Sarah Hansen of San Jose, California, is another first-generation descendant of the Alaska Sami herders. Her father, Mike Sarah, was 13 when he came to Alaska with his father, mother, and uncle, his 3 brothers, and his sister. Julia says, "They crossed America to Seattle, which my father remembered as being a village back then. The reindeer and the herders were taken to Woodland Park, where there was a 10-day delay. Word quickly spread about the exotic Lapps and their weird clothing, and thousands flocked to Woodland Park just to stare at them and see the reindeer." They arrived at Haines Mission on March 27th, and things began to disintegrate. All the reindeer moss had been consumed on the long trip from Norway, and despite efforts at feeding with various alternatives, the reindeer began to rapidly die off. Despite the miserable weather conditions and the increasing weakness of the reindeer from lack of food, the herders began driving the herd through the bush up the Chilkat River on April 5th. On May 6th, even though that they had not reached the summit of Chilkat Pass, 16 of the men were detailed to continue north with the surviving 185 reindeer. They finally reached Circle City on February 28, 1899, with only 116 animals. Meanwhile, the rest of the men, almost starving, had returned to Haines Mission. On May 15, 1898, they boarded a steamer, and 3 days later they were back at Port Townsend. Jackson sold the U.S. government on the idea of using reindeer for winter mail delivery in Alaska, and established a reindeer station called Eaton Station, which was just outside of Unalakleet. Jackson persuaded most of the herders to go to Eaton Station to participate in this new project. They left Port Townsend on June 28th and reached Unalakleet at the end of July. Bernie writes, "At long last, after nearly 5 months had gone by since they left Bosacope and their native soil, they were at their new homeland. We can imagine the relief that must have been to them, for now they could begin what they had come all this distance and endured all the strange happenings to do. They could begin a new life in a new land. They were young, they were brave, and they came by ship and train from one side of the Arctic Circle to another. With the help of their hardworking reindeer and trusty herd dogs, they made history. They made Alaska their home, and their descendants live there still. It is said that wherever reindeer are introduced, people come together in a good way. Thank you.